Well, hello there, Space Monkeys. Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. Today we're going to be returning to Dreamland. I know it's been a while. I apologize. It's been busy over the holidays. This is chapter 45. We was carrying the epidemic. Page 241. Eastern Kentucky. In spring of 2003, a crew of non-union ironworkers left Greenup County, Kentucky for Fort Walton Beach in the Florida Panhandle to erect the frame of a new Walmart supercenter. Greenup County is across the river from Portsmouth, Ohio. It has a long tradition of non-union ironworker crews, a vestige of the steel industry that once thrived along the Ohio River. Long after steel left, Greenup families were still making their living this way, and crews traveled the country for jobs like that Walmart project in Fort Walton Beach. But by 2003, many of their sons and other young workers were caught up in pill addiction. One addict on that crew was Jarrett Withrow. Jarrett had already given up a lot for dope. He hoped for a college basketball scholarship, but in high school in Portsmouth, everyone was using pills. Jarrett started in with the Vicodin prescribed to him by John Lilly at his downtown clinic. Once addicted, Jarrett stole OxyContin from his father, who was dying of cancer. He remained hooked on OxyContin for 8 years. It consumed every plan he had. Before long, he was on a Greenup County iron crew. That spring of '03, his crew was on the Fort Walton Beach job for a couple of weeks when their pill supply ran short. One afternoon, one of the crew left and came back that night. "Look what I got," he said, holding up bottles of pills he was prescribed that afternoon. Turned out, Florida doctors were awfully easygoing when it came to prescribing these pills. Florida had no prescription monitoring system that checked on each patient to see whether he had visited other clinics, scamming doctors for pills. No one in Florida had seen the business potential. The Greenup crew began going to these doctors and asking coworkers from Florida to go as well, and then sell them the pills. Then they sent the pills back to Kentucky and sold them for triple. "I can remember at first they felt we were going crazy doing these prescription pills," Jarrett said. "We'd have them go to a doctor for us. At first they'd give the pills to us really, really cheap. They hiked the prices eventually, but that, quote, triggered the idea that this was easy," Jarrett said. "Other people began saying, 'Let's go find doctors.' My friend continued to go down there monthly, like his family doctor was down there in Florida or something. He started telling other people. We was carrying the prescription pill epidemic." As I dug around attempting to understand how the opiate epidemic spread, I found many stories like Withrow's. With pain pills now so easily prescribed, the pills moved among vulnerable populations by casual contact, a chance meeting, not unlike the way Ebola and AIDS viruses advanced. New opiate addicts spread information on where to find pills in a way the way a cough spread the germs. Some of the most potent early vectors were newly christened junkies from eastern Kentucky, where coal mines were closing and SSI and Medicaid cards sustained life. These addicts, feigning pain and injury, mined local doctors and pharmacists, who quickly got wise. Kentucky, to its credit, was one of the first to put in a system tracking what drugs each patient had been prescribed and by whom. But 7 states border Kentucky. Many eastern Kentuckians have relatives who left to find work in other states, and after decades of out-migration, state lines tend to not matter much to folks from the region. The Kentucky prescription monitoring system, therefore, very quickly had the unintended consequence of pushing the state's new opiate addicts across state lines in search of other pills, tapping first their networks of friends and relatives. This kind of travel in search of illicit products was also already part of many eastern Kentucky counties, where bootlegging was common. These counties had been dry for years. Generations of bootleggers had grown up illegally selling alcohol they brought in from wet counties, which local cops either winked at or shielded. Among these was Floyd County, population 30,000, which finally went wet in 1983. Before that, though, bootlegging led us into decades of corruption of the police forces, said Arnold Turner, a former Floyd County prosecutor and father of the current prosecutor Brent Turner. It created a network of criminals, and as they lost the ability to deal in alcohol, they had to find another product. Then, with bootlegging, you had a public dulled into low expectations when it came to contraband and illegal activity. People were used to it. No one saw the monster coming. That was the foundation that let this juggernaut of pills start coming in. Many of these bootleggers became almost advance men for the epidemic. One of them was a man named Timmy Wayne Hall. Hall had grown up in Branham Creek Holler in Floyd County, the son of a factory worker who was also a preacher in the Church of God. Hall's siblings and relatives worked in nearby coal mines. Floyd County hadn't many jobs outside the coal mines, which were tough places to make a living. Hall had other things in mind and never did work a day in his life. In 1980, he married into a family of bootleggers. He began driving down to Perry County, buying cases of Schlitz beer, the cheapest available and thus the bootlegger's favorite, and selling them out of the family's house in Floyd for triple. After Floyd County voted to go wet, Hall applied for SSI and, like several families in his holler, began getting a monthly check. He was prescribed Lorcet after a car accident, which he could afford with his Medicaid insurance card. He promptly grew addicted to the pills. There weren't many drug addicts in Floyd County back then, and most, like Tommy, used 10 milligram Lorcets, a pill that combined hydrocodone with acetaminophen. But in 1996, OxyContin came out, and soon people from all over were getting addicted to it. No doctor would prescribe Hall OxyContin at first. Nobody was supposed to get them but cancer patients, Hall said. Plus, in 1999, the state put in its prescription monitoring program. With Kentucky off limits, Hall found an Oxy connection through a Floyd County friend in Detroit. He also found other connections in Dayton and Toledo. He had read about New York mafioso John Gotti and Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar years before. OxyContin allowed him, a man without much else in his life, to imagine following in their footsteps. He began driving regularly up to Ohio and Detroit for pills. These connections were reliable enough so that things got bad in Floyd County where OxyContin was concerned. But in 2004, Floyd County began to get a lot worse. A local trucker named Russ Mead was driving across Louisiana one day. Mead spotted billboards for a clinic called Urgent Care in the town of Slidell that mentioned prescription pain pills. Being from Floyd, Mead knew pills' value. He stopped in, was prescribed a bunch, brought them home, and sold them. Onto something, he began to drive down to Slidell, a 17-hour trip with several Floyd County addicts paying for their visits, then keeping half the pills that they were prescribed. Among them was a man named Larry Goebel. Goebel was a former miner on disability with black lung who had briefly been a deputy sheriff. Mead later died, but Goebel kept driving down to urgent care with his addicts, paying for their trips and $500 doctor visits, which he saw amounted to a charade with a physician. In payment, he took half the pills they were prescribed. Goebel later testified in federal court that he used some and sold the rest. Soon dozens of folks from Floyd County were driving the 17 hours to Slidell. The clinic's owner, Michael Lehman, next opened another in Philadelphia, hiring a drug-addicted alcoholic doctor named Randy Weiss to see patients. Despite the urgent care name, Weiss later testified the clinic had no equipment to treat people with urgent medical needs, such as making casts or stitching wounds. Lehman's clinics charged Eastern Kentuckians $500 a visit, while locals only paid $250. Then he opened up an urgent care in Cincinnati. He hired Dr. Stan Naramore, who had been convicted of murder in Kansas, then had that conviction overturned on appeal. Carloads from Floyd County began making pilgrimages to Philadelphia and to Cincinnati each week. From these urgent care clinics, a new flood of pills washed into Floyd County, upsetting a tenuous balance in the hollers. Among these creeks, some families led lives of quiet decency, trying to raise children and hold what jobs they could get in an area where work was hard to come by. Other families, though, had been unemployed for generations and on government assistance. Up to then, they had resorted to small-time criminal activities but remained minor irritants in holler life. When Oxy came along, however, the sorriest of families were transformed into dominant and unruly forces. Timmy Wayne Hall was among the biggest customers of Lehman's new urgent care clinic in Philly. Hall traveled constantly back and forth, paying others to drive for him because he was heavily addicted. I was taking 20, 25 people a month to Philadelphia. The patients would sit in the car. I'd go in there and get their scripts, then go to the pharmacy in their name. It was only 20 feet away. With each patient receiving close to 500 pills and Hall taking half of that, he was clearing more than $4,000 for every person he hauled up to an urgent care. He was also scoring pills from Detroit and connections in 3 other states, though never in Kentucky, as he feared the state's prescription monitoring program. Back home, he made a killing on the first of the month when the SSI checks arrived in Floyd County. He began hiring dealers to sell for him. At his peak, he figured he had dealers selling in 5 counties in eastern Kentucky. When he heard of competitors, he would go to their customers and offer them Oxy 80 milligram pills for $65 a piece, instead of the $70 the competitors were charging. He sold all over, watching as OxyContin seeped into every corner of eastern Kentucky. Men with professional jobs in wealthy Pike County were his pill customers. So were the construction guys who worked on their houses. Hall, a man who'd never worked, now bought a dozen houses in and near Branham Creek Holler. He often took friends on road trips and paid for everyone's hotel room. A coterie of junkies hung about him, and he paid them to cook, wash his clothes, vacuum his house, cut the grass, and do odd jobs on his properties. He grew intoxicated with the power and the fact that the pills allowed him to be, for Kentucky, the magnanimous Don. He had a habit of up to 20 Oxy 80s a day. He was arrested in 2007. During withdrawal, he went into a seizure and was briefly pronounced dead, then spent 6 months learning to walk again. When he pled guilty, Hall confessed to selling 200,000 OxyContin and methadone pills, though the real figure was likely far higher. "I'm sorry for the things I've done," Hall said when I spoke to him by the phone from the federal prison where he is now serving 15 years. "I was brought up in the church and didn't want to hurt no one, but I was an out-of-control drug addict who didn't realize who I was hurting." With money and addiction urging them on, meanwhile, Floyd County addict entrepreneurs were like bloodhounds sniffing out shady docks in far-flung places. An oxycodone 30 milligram pill cost $8 in Florida and could fetch $30 back home. Florida had no prescription monitoring, so any pharmacist would fill a script. The first Floyd County guy to discover Florida was apparently Jim Marcellet II, who ran a stable of addicted women down to Fort Lauderdale in an RV once a week. Marcellet first ventured to Florida after federal investigators closed down an urgent care clinic in Philadelphia and then in Cincinnati, where he had been buying. With the opening of the Florida Territory, a new Appalachian migration began, south this time. Campers voyaged weekly down from the oxy-wrecked regions of Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia for doctor visits. The OxyContin Express was the name given to flights from Huntington, West Virginia to Fort Lauderdale. By 2009, of the top 10 oxycodone prescribing counties in America, 9 were in Florida. The other was in Scioto County, Ohio, where Portsmouth is located. Broward County had 4 pain clinics in 2007 and 115 2 years later. Initially, Florida officials didn't seem too concerned as long as the hillbillies left their money and took the pills with them when they left. It wasn't until 2009 that Florida put in a prescription monitoring system, the last state in the country to do so. By then, customers from as far away as Colorado were heading to Florida. Yet it was hard-up folks from Ohio and Kentucky who discovered the Sunshine State. Randy Hunter, a Kentucky State Police detective from Floyd County, ended up traveling the country following the Floyd County pill migration. He made cases in New Orleans, Philadelphia, Houston, and cities in Florida against the shady docs and pain clinic owners who sold to itinerant Floyd County addict entrepreneurs. "We saw a lot of eastern Kentucky go out of state," said Hunter, now retired, as he took me on a tour of the hollers of Floyd County one day. "They traveled like gypsies, roaming around looking for pills. When they found a honeycomb of pills, they stayed. And not only stayed, but they brought friends and family." So we will finish up another chapter. This is More Cases Than Car Crashes on page 247. That'll be chapter 46 in the next episode. Hope you're enjoying the book, guys. Keep fighting that good fight.